I'm Matt Reynolds, and this is my podcast.
I can do the job, but running the business is quite difficult. What a lot of tradesmen lack, and I was probably one of them, is business skills.
I don't mind making mistakes. You learn from your mistakes.
Information is all around you in the minds of people that work beside you.
Welcome back to the Trench Talk podcast. I'm your host, Matt Reynolds, and today I spoke with Tessa Carroll, the co-founder of both the luxury accessories label, Ahimsa Collective, and the Common Good Company. The idea of these discussions, for those of you joining us for the first time, is to go into the trenches of achievement and talk not with people who are orchestrating from some lofty perspective, but to those high performers who are actually in the trenches honing their craft. That has included guests from the worlds of business, sport and entertainment, all of whom are on the front lines doing amazing things. Tessa was brought up to turn off the taps when brushing her teeth and to make sure the lights weren't left on unnecessarily. So she developed a keen interest in the environment early in life. That upbringing, coupled with her interest in design and fashion, has led to the creation of two unique and very impressive companies. Ahimsa Collective is a luxury accessories label intent on producing products with no harm. Reading from their website, the ahimsacollective.com, you quickly get a feel for the company and what they stand for. We are part of a new generation of change agents and thinkers. We focus on both the environment and social responsibility. We operate as a luxury fashion label while inciting change. We aim to not only reduce the fashion industry's footprint, but attempt to reverse it. As you'll hear, Ahimsa Collective bags are made from pineapple leaves and recycled materials that would otherwise go to landfill. The Common Good Company uses recycled materials and ethical practices to manufacture apparel in the benefits or interests of all. When choosing one of their t-shirts, you are saving 2,700 litres of water, 170 grams of textile waste and 4.5 plastic water bottles from landfill. During our chat, we covered a lot, including Tessa's journey building both companies, why she's passionate about fashion and dedicated to cleaning up the industry, how her products are made and put together, a lot about their supply chain and all the elements that go into reversing the effects of the fashion industry's footprint, the causes she's supporting through the business, and as always, much, much more. You can find out more about Tessa at tessacarroll.com. You'll find Ahimsa Collective at theahimsacollective.com and the Common Good Company at thecommongoodco.com. If you enjoy Trench Talk, head to xrm.com.au/podcast and opt in for the newsletter. We'll make sure you're notified when every new episode of the show is released. Trench Talk is available everywhere good podcasts are served, so if you're feeling super nice, please leave a review, comment, rating, or whatever your chosen podcast platform allows. Enjoy this chat with Tessa Carroll. Tessa, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
You're a traveller by nature. In 2014, you took advantage of the then rise of the Wi-Fi kid, as you just put it before we start, and you took off to the US.
Yep.
What happened?
So I had been working in fashion at that stage for about 4 years in the industry after graduating from my degree, and I was working for a business who was developing product in South America. So I was able to travel to and from South America quite a lot from Australia, and I then grabbed the laptop and took a move to North America and was able to work from whatever Wi-Fi cafe I wanted for about 2 years or so. And in that time I made the move to South America, which was absolutely game-changing and certainly changed my path in fashion and in production, and taught me, or actually made very evident, what my role in fashion was doing to the planet and how I needed to make change.
And what did you see that was eye-opening even for you, who was working in the industry at the time? Because we associate luxury brands particularly with opulence and all the rest that goes with it, but we don't often consider behind the scenes. So what did you see that and what did you learn?
So interestingly, I've been a fashion designer now for 15 or so years, and I grew up with a really sustainably minded family. We were never allowed plastic, really. We had everything was in paper, sandwich paper, and homemade everything. And still to the day, my parents are exactly the same. And I never thought that that was unusual, but I always knew that I wanted to be a fashion designer. So I grew up with this creative side of me, making fashionable clothes as I thought they were, out of things like fly wire or, anything that I could find I was using a different material for. And then I got into the fashion industry and I started to see it from the I was working in Melbourne and I was able to I was a shoe developer and a number of different roles. And I sort of saw the industry side of things. And until I got to South America, I didn't really understand the factory side of things. And it was 2014 and I had been living in Peru for quite some time. And one of the afternoons, and I'd seen everyone picking and packing the boxes that were about to be exported out, and all of the plastic bags that every single T-shirt that I was developing myself was going into. It was going into these boxes to be shipped back to Australia. And I took a bus ride out through the mountains, and it was supposed to be a really picturesque, beautiful bus ride. And as I looked down the mountaintop, there were half the plastic bags that I had just seen. That was my responsibility to having ordered this amount of T-shirts and placing that purchase order. And even thinking about it now gives me shivers on my arms, because they were just strewn across the mountain, and I knew that was my responsibility and I needed to change. And I was 26 at the time, so it was a big pivotal moment for me.
So the bags, they were like leftover bags?
Yeah, they were from product that had come in that they'd ripped out of, if it was yarn, for example, because they were spinning their own yarn, and the yarn would come in sacks and plastics and then be stripped out and thrown. It's not the Peruvian factory's fault per se. It's actually the way in which there was no trash management and there was no infrastructure in place to manage any of this. And also there was a complete, and there still is, a level of ignorance that if it's out of sight, it's out of mind, or this concept of throwing things away, that it's going somewhere, which it's not, because there is no such thing as away. And this was so interesting to me because I'd watched from the front end of this factory who were picking and packing and putting into boxes all of the things that I had placed the purchase order and signed for. And on the back of the factory was the disposal and the plastics that were coming in and going out and up and down this hill. And, we're watching these trucks driving up and over, these canyons, and there's nowhere to put the trash. So they rise the back of the truck and out goes the trash straight down the mountain. And it was just heartbreaking. Yeah. So I knew then that whatever I did from that day forth had to be very mindful of the environment. I had probably already had that upbringing, which really helped me to see that it was possible to live a different lifestyle. But that was the moment, I guess.
So have you ever thought why you reacted that way in that moment? Because people could see that and go on with their day and not worry about it. But for some reason for you, that moment in time, it struck a chord that has changed your direction, which we'll get to.
Hugely.
But have you thought about why that actually happened at all?
I guess, like any ignorant young fashion designer or any person who graduates from any sort of, or does any sort of training and then, wants to live in this big dream world of being a fashion designer. Yeah. We sometimes put these blinkers on our eyes to see only what we want to see. And I had been brought up to know that, well, not even that plastic wasn't good, but that we just didn't use it. We didn't need it. And so I always had an inherent nature not to really opt for things that were in single-use plastic. It wasn't really how we ever thought of things. We always bought things in bulk, or they were made. My parents make everything, as I said before. Yeah. And so that visual of seeing this truck dump this plastic down the mountain as I'm going up to see this beautiful, pristine part of the Andes and look out across this incredible canyon and this unbelievable sight, it struck me, I think, mainly because I could no longer hide from it. I couldn't just put my blinkers on and pretend, but I'm living this great fashionable lifestyle and doing all these things. Yeah, it was the chord. Yeah.
So what did you do from that point forward? Do you remember what you first did?
Yes, I remember marching into the factory office, and I was speaking Pidgin Spanish at the time. I had to learn because that was obviously they speak Spanish in Peru. So I started getting really emotional in my faux Latino accent, and I asked them about biodegradable plastic, and they sort of scratched their heads, and it was really, it was 2014, so it was a different era. Yes. They knew that it was available, but they weren't really sure how or where, and so I set this path in motion to get potato turned into plastic, which was, I don't know if you know much about Peru, but they have 17 different types of potatoes.
Yeah, lots of potatoes,
I love their potatoes. Potatoes is a very regular food source, as well as able to make really good bioplastics out of. So that was one side. I had to make sure that the factory could create it. And then I had to start on the negotiations with the company I was working for to add that extra 14 cents per garment, which was the cost per bioplastic bag. So that was a really tough discussion. I knew that if that didn't pivot, that would be a breaker for me.
14 cents to a lot of these garments doesn't sound like much to us, but it's huge back at that early stage of production, right?
It is. You can literally be sitting in conversations trying to get 70 cents is a huge jump between
Yes.
$6 and $6.70. And we're talking US dollars as well. So 14 cents, it doesn't sound like a lot, but when it's a plastic bag and there's a cheaper option and you're just trying to land a T-shirt for low cost, because we don't place a lot of value in our product.
Particularly in 2014, right?
Especially in 2014.
You could probably argue now that we're really starting to open our eyes to a lot of these things,
We are.
but back then not so much. So
No.
did they listen to you? Did they change? Did it start to happen? How did it go down?
It was a tough conversation. I mean, it was a small startup brand that I've been working with. I was with them for 7 years. I learnt almost everything I know now from how that business was run and who I was working with. They were hesitant at first because obviously margins, and they were all the same age as I am. So early 30s, it was definitely their make or break kind of brand. And they were definitely resistant, but after a few conversations, they adopted to it
They did?
quickly.
They
They
changed?
did.
Okay.
And we ended up getting these really cool now. It's 2020. You'd expect everyone has biodegradable plastic bags, but at the time, there was no biodegradable bags on any product. So, yeah, we got these cool bags made up out of potato starch and branded with our logos and things that I believed in written on them about Mother Nature being our home girl. And our product came in those after that. And after that, all of our packaging, everything was recycled, and it was still an uphill battle a bit. But pivoting any business from how it knows it can work and operate and profit and into something that's greener or better values is always a challenge.
Yes.
But yeah, it was a worthy cause.
There's a real key marketing element here, isn't there? Because as things start to change, you can really use that to differentiate differentiate even yourself from other maybe more established brands by using that story.
Yeah.
But having a new story accepted and communicated can be quite challenging.
Yeah.
Right? So what did you do to try and communicate that? Was there a big change in the focus there?
Because I had been with the business for so long and I knew the founders so well, it was very evident my change. I mean, I feel like I must have even looked different. I had come back from South America being this, I'm not going to say gypsy, but I was very much aware of what my values were, which was in ethical and sustainable fashion. And I was really banging that drum. I had a gut feeling and I'd seen enough to know that this was the way that the industry was going to change. Mm-hmm. Not all of my values were accepted or pushed through the way that I would have liked them to. And, that led me to going out and doing my own thing later on. But for the most part, it was such an interesting time because it wasn't a trendy thing to be sustainable. Yeah. It was almost dorky and it wasn't cool to care. Ethical fashion wasn't what it is today. It certainly was there, especially from the landmarks we've got in our history of fashion in the last 10 years alone, and what has turned us into this ethical space now. As an industry, we're really waking up to what we need to be doing. But that wasn't necessarily a talking point. And so it was a bit of an uphill battle at times. Still got a friendship with the boys that I worked with. But, yeah.
You obviously decided to do your own thing.
Yeah.
Which is where your bags and brand started. At what point was that? Why did you choose bags? Where did that idea come from?
In my awakening, my gypsy phase, I really started looking into sustainability and what that meant for the things that I was using and the things that I was eating. So there are two big F words, I think, on the planet, and that is food and fashion. And if we looked at both of those industries, they are the most influential of trends and markets that we have. And I looked into, unbeknown to me, watched a documentary that caused me to stop eating meat and adopted a plant-based lifestyle. And from that, I stopped buying leather. Luckily for me, or interestingly enough for me, prior to working with the business in South America, I had been a leather developer. And if I was no longer going to buy leather, I could buy plastic, or PU, or pleather, or polyurethane is the actual term for it, which is what they call vegan leather, which bothers me endlessly because it's neither of those things.
Because the first iteration of a lot of these products being, vegan leather, as you said,
were
probably a lot worse, to my understanding, than the original.
Yeah.
Right. So we've sort of gone through this evolution in a lot of different industries as we've gone to correct a few of those things.
Yeah.
But because it was a plastic base, is that right?
Yeah. So it's
alternative.
Yeah.
You're adding to the pollution.
Oils, polymers that it cannot break down. My biggest plight was that if you cared about the animals, then you care about the planet. If you care about the planet, then why are you buying a plastic bag? And that left me looking into leather and why leather is so toxic. And actually the interesting part, or the other side of that, is that if you're to buy a leather bag, it's no longer a natural product under your arm, because whilst it came from the skin of an animal, it's been treated so many times to avoid it rotting whilst you carry it. The chemicals that are embedded in it, once that goes into land, they leach into the planet, and it's just as terrible as plastic. So it's a lesser of evils. Where do you put your money? How slippery is the slope?
Exactly. So you looked for an alternative.
Yeah, I knew that if I was going to do my own business, it had to be, well, firstly, I was trying to buy a handbag, to be honest with you.
Okay.
And I couldn't buy a bag that wasn't plastic, and I couldn't buy a bag that was leather. So I started researching as much as I could, and this material called Pinatex had just been developed, and I'd seen it on Facebook, and It was this advert saying leather made from pineapple fibre or something like that, and I looked into it a bit more, and I was not so sure about it at the start of using it, but growing with that business has been eye-opening, to say the least, in textile innovation, and what they now can do with that material is really interesting. But yes, it's made from the fibres of a pineapple plant.
And there's quite a bit, obviously, between can't buy a bag, seeing an advert on Facebook, and then actually holding a bag. So how did that work for you? Because that's not easy to put together, right?
No, I think this is where Q stage left, my business partner, steps into my life. So I have always been a very creative person, coming up with, I knew what the brand looked like. I knew in my head how this would play out in terms of, I knew what styles looked like. I knew that it had to be function over fashion. It had to satisfy all these XYZ things. But let's say that my appetite for going and doing those things on my own is not the greatest.
Yeah,
and
okay.
I was practicing at a yoga studio, and the girl behind the counter, this little British thing, was behind the counter, and we started having these conversations about sustainability and plastics and what have you. And I'm a bit of an oversharer, and I described the brand that I had in my mind, and I didn't let her get a word in, which I don't know if you can tell, that's a thing for me. And by the end of the conversation, she said, "Well, that's funny, I'm doing the same business as you." And I thought, oh my gosh, no, you're not. You're a yoga teacher. There's no way in the world you're doing this exact same business as me. And it turned out she'd been working on the blueprint for the exact same brand, but she was, as I said, a yoga teacher. Little did I know she was a sales and marketing guru from London, and operations and account management. And so she was the exact piece of the puzzle that I needed to get the ball in motion. So with her on operations and finance and legal, and me doing creative and branding and visuals, and a lot of her momentum, which is dog and a bone. She sees a problem, she chases it.
Goes after it. Yeah. One of the key qualities of an entrepreneur, right? You need someone to have that in your organisation, or things don't get done.
Yeah, so you need an ideas and you need a doer, and together we work really well together. Not that she doesn't come up with ideas, she's very full of ideas, but she's also go-getter and go-doer.
And you're still partners today? You still?
Yeah.
Okay,
yeah.
Awesome.
So we're 50-50 ownership of the brand. She's in Sydney, I'm in Melbourne, and we call ourselves National. So yeah, it's just the two of us at the moment. It's been an 18-month journey to the date to where we are now, and it's been an industry change that I cannot even begin to explain how different this landscape is today.
So just to go back to the bag, you obviously, I'm assuming, sketched it out, you had your design ideas and that sort of thing. Did you just buy a roll of this material in and start stitching it together yourself, or do you get it manufactured somewhere? Or?
If only it was that easy. No. So because it's a textile innovation, so how it's made is through stripping out the leaves of the pineapple plant. They're then felted together in a non-woven way. So I don't know if you've ever seen felt being made like wool, where they strip out all these fibres and then they heat them or press them and they roll them into a new material.
Oh, they stick, and that forms a fabric. Okay,
That's what essentially Pinatex or pineapple fibres have done here. And because of this innovation, they were impossible to get our hands on. They weren't working with any small startups, and rightly so. They had their eyes set on the big players of the game. They knew that they'd get a higher purchase prices, etc., etc. Economies of scale. So Susie, my beloved business partner, had enough of them ignoring her and took a flight to London and sat on the doorstep until they let her in and then she sat in reception until they finally finished for the day, and she said, "I'm Susie. I've been emailing you for months. Would you please just give me some sampling?"
Yeah.
So they gave us 5 metres to sample with.
Okay.
Which was probably where the problems got thicker, I guess. We're working with an innovative material. It's plant-based. No one's ever used it before. We've got to find a bag maker. Got to work with a bag maker who's only ever used leather, who's not really as pioneering in that space and mentally as we probably needed. We needed someone who was like, right, plant-based is where the future is. Let's learn how to do it. He wasn't necessarily as gung-ho as that. He was very much a leather developer, but he worked with us really well for the first 9-10 months, taught us how to use the material. And it's been a journey to make sure that everything within the handbag, each handbag has got either a recycled component to make sure that it's strong enough, to make sure it's been backed and finished off the way that has a durability factor about it. Otherwise, we're creating more problems for the fashion industry, really.
Yeah, so there's two things, isn't there? There's using materials in a sustainable way, and then there's the other aspect, which I know you've addressed, which is actually bringing back materials that have gone to waste and actually reusing them. So these bags, if I've got my information correct, contain parts of old yoga mats. Mm-hmm. They contain parts of abseiling ropes.
Yep.
I'm fascinated with how these all come together. I know you obviously practice yoga because you said. Yeah. So was there a point where you're like, we need this to be softer, so we should, I don't know, line this with a yoga mat? Or like, how does it sort of happen?
Well, if you think about it, and it probably doesn't apply to you, but if I say this to most women, I'll say I've carried a handbag since I was 14 years of age. And I was very early adopter of a handbag, and I never cut it in half around the circumference and looked inside.
Okay.
But there's always plastic in there. So there's a heavy cardboard or heavy plastics, and that's what gives the bag structure. So if you're looking to replace virgin materials,
sort of almost like that fluffy kind of like buoyant feel or look.
Yeah, that's right. It either makes the bag stand up, it gives it durability. Then on the outside, it's always got like either a patent plastic or a patent leather, or there's always some form of plastic within it. And because we were making in Sydney, and my business partner is a yoga teacher, we had access to umpteen amounts of yoga mats that were being discarded because they were no longer used. We had small batch production, so we could put essentially anything we wanted into these bags. And we needed a material that was 2 millimeters thick, had a rubber-like feeling about it. And, the bag maker we were working with showed us what he was already using, which was virgin material of this sort of look. And Susie said, well, that looks like a yoga mat, and I know exactly where to get those. So we were able to work with yoga mats, and abseiling ropes was the next interesting one because this was 2017 we started working together, and the word got out pretty quickly that we were using waste to create new luxury products. And it was very interesting who would call us. We would have people calling us saying, I work for X, Y, and Z, and I don't know what to do with this. And, my boss just says to put it in the bin, but I don't really want to do that. Could you do something with it? And we would I went out to a place in Nunawading and looked at all of his posters that he'd made of banners and things, and it had all been boxed up to go to landfill, and he couldn't bear to do it, so he was hiding them in the back of the warehouse, and he wanted me to do something with it. But the abseiling ropes was similar, where they said, we've got all these ropes, we've tested them, they hold 2 tons worth of weight, and now we've got to put it in the bin because we've tested it to its end degree. Do you want to use them? Because you don't need to carry 2 tons worth of stuff on your handbag. Well, you shouldn't.
Yes, yeah.
And so we would put them on the inside of our straps. So I don't know if you've ever seen a tubular strap on a handbag.
I have, yeah. I've in preparation of this, I've sort of taken a bit more of a notice of handbags and that, which I must admit I really never have before. So
to get a handle tubular, there's usually a piece of rope in that, and then it's flattened out and put onto the handbag itself. We used abseiling rope. Our intention was to always use waste. And when you look at the bag itself, you would never know that it had that in it until I told you or until you dug a bit deeper. I think we call it scratch the surface on the website, where, we'll tell you a bit about the bag, but if you really want to know more, you can click the next tab and find out more, because we also realise that we don't want to be giving you overload of information for most people.
So how many of these different styles do you make?
So we're currently just finished collection 2. I'm about to launch collection 3. Each collection has had about 6 or 7 different styles in it, and most use Pinatex, which is the pineapple fibre, or we've used washable paper, which is another amazing invention of the textile gods. And then we line everything in eco-poly or eco-prene, as we call it, which feels like a wetsuit material, but it's made out of recycled carpet and recycled polyester and recycled water bottles, for example.
And they're all the cardboard and the paper that you said, they can make that tough enough?
Yeah, they can.
Okay.
And if you bond it correctly, we use it for many different applications, either making the bag stand upright or giving it a slouchy feel, depending on how it's applied.
So the designs themselves, they come out of just your mind, your creative spirit, just from what you're thinking at the time?
Yeah, the designs themselves were whatever I would like to be carrying. We have a bit of a joke within the business because Susie, being the sales London gal, she started the brand strictly because she was looking for a cream clutch to take to a wedding. And as all Brits do, she was going to wear a hat. And every time we talk about weddings, she says, I'll get a hat. So she wanted a cream clutch and a hat for a wedding. And she couldn't find a cream clutch that wasn't plastic and wasn't leather. So that's basically how designs sort of come together. It's, what do we need? What do we want? A big one for us was that we wanted to be able to carry our laptops. We wanted to be able to, I'm not someone who can usually get around with a small clutch. They're not really I can't fit everything in them. So we actually started to try and make this cream clutch for the wedding. And halfway through first design, I sort of said to Susie, well, we can't put a keep cup, a cloth bag or a water bottle in this. So I don't know who on earth we're selling it to if we can't carry it ourselves. And that's been one of our biggest pushes, is to make sure that all things are sort of accounted for. But yeah, that's the design phase. The procurement and innovation phase of developing these bags has been the tougher journey. So trying to keep them simple design, the procurement's the challenge.
I wanted to ask where you think the future of all this is headed in a second, but the other element of a lot of this stuff is not only getting the right products to start with, but it's how it's treated along the way, which I know you touched on just a second ago. Do you also look at that element to see what the ramifications of that is? Because you can take a natural product and some of the faults of some of these early things were probably along these lines, but you've got to so harshly treat them or whatever to get them to a usable stage. Mm-hmm. So you've got to make sure that's right as well, which obviously you're saying you address, right?
Yeah, not only that. So one part of procuring the materials is making sure that you're looking at the entire supply chain and how that looks from a raw materials, how the people are treated when they're collecting the pineapple plant leaves, all the way through to how they're produced and then how they're shipped. So we provide and go through that quite regularly. It's something that we're really passionate about, to make sure that the farmers who are farming the pineapples, for example, it's such an interesting story, the Pinatex story. I'll briefly tell you about it. But essentially, the founder of Pinatex saw that pineapple fibres were such a strong material and were able to create this non-woven fabric. So they then set about creating these parts of the villages in the Philippines where they collect the leaves. They ensured that the farmers were able to then sell the leaves for extra money, and when they're making that pineapple leaf fibre, they can create a biogas that they can then run their tractors with and sell the biogas back to the farm in the village.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah, it's another form of income that was already unrealised, really.
And the other element of all this is also the transport costs after they're made, which is another big factor, because you can give away all your advantage just if you have to ship the product too far, it's not shipped in an economical way, and all that sort of stuff as well.
Yeah, so we use a carbon neutral delivery partner, which is something that was...
I didn't even know they existed.
They do.
There you go.
And the big guys do it too now, which is a sign at the Times.
Okay.
It's sort of like it's not really like how you can click, but when you buy a airline ticket and you click, do you want to make this CO2 reduction?
Yeah, offset your carbon credits.
Carbon credits. Yeah, do you want to do that? It's sort of like that, except that, people such as even DHL have a carbon neutral delivery service now that you can opt for. We work with a business called Sendle for our courier, but it is a very interesting conversation. For an example, and I joked about this with my partner this morning, I ran into an old family friend over the summer, family friend's father, and he said, so what are you up to these days? And I said, I'm doing this handbag brand. And I showed him one of the bags, and I said, it's made of pineapple leaves and water bottles. And his first question was, well, if you're making them overseas, what about the emissions to bring it back to Australia? And it really angered me, because I just turned to him and I said, well, Henry, if I was to show you a leather handbag and told you that it was 40-day-old Angus beef leather and here's my handbag, would you ask me about the emissions, or would you say, that's a good looking bag?
Yeah.
And he went bright red and he said, you know what, you're right, I wouldn't have even thought about it. But it's that slippery slope conversation. It's a really challenging space to be in, because what we don't need is 100 people doing things perfectly. What we need is tens of millions of people doing things imperfectly with the right intention. So that's the only way we're going to create any sort of change. And it's such an interesting thing to put yourself out there as a fashion designer or anyone in this day and age and say you're doing something for the good of X, Y, and Z, and then be ready to field all the questions.
Yeah, you stick your neck out, right? You've got to expect, I suppose, in some ways, rightly or wrongly, that someone will take a swing from time to time.
Yeah, and I welcome the questions, but maybe it was that I'd had enough of the Christmas conversations.
Yeah, maybe.
But it really is such an interesting one to think about. Emissions definitely are so important, and we actually, as part of our business and our major ethos, is a level of social enterprise. So we donate $5 of every sale for every handbag back to ocean regeneration. So I don't know if you know this, but the ocean is the biggest provider of oxygen, obviously, because it's a carbon sequestration field.
Which we're covering day by day with more and more plastic, right? Which reduces its effectiveness. So,
we are.
Yeah.
And when they were feeding the fish with the plastic, and we're losing the forests, the sea forests under the water, which is what eats the carbon. It's a really interesting one. So another part of our business is a give back program where we invest or donate to foundations who are improving the health of our planet, and more specifically the ocean.
So what sort of price do these bags sell for roughly? I know it probably changes over time from collection to collection and piece to piece, but where do you sit at the moment in terms of pricing?
So our competitors came into the market probably about 6 months before us with an $800 to $900 handbag.
Okay.
For us, that's not where we sit as consumers. We think that if you're a conscious consumer, you will buy the right product, but you're not going to spend $900 on a handbag any longer. So we made our highest price point bag at $400 and our entry price point at $100. So we sort of filled the market for a young girl who's aware and wants to buy something that's unique and still satisfies all of her values, and the older woman who still has the money to spend on a good handbag but also cares how it's made and where it's made.
Who is the person that buys this brand? Have you profiled that ideal client?
We did at the start, and then we realised that she's actually comes in many different forms, and she may have found us from looking from a cruelty-free perspective where we're not using animal products, therefore we satisfy that box for her. Or she's still a meat eater, but she knows that to make a change she has to choose things that are more sustainable. So it's not really a surprise any longer for us as a society to discuss veganism and the impact that meat consumption has on the planet. But I'm not the sort of person, and neither of us in our business are the sort of people who need you to be vegan to buy a bag. You just need to care about the planet that you live on. We could all make a change by reducing our meat intake from 5 times a week to 2 times a week if we wanted to do something like that. It's not about veganism in our brand, it's about sustainability.
You're right. I wanted to actually ask you about how you make your choices just in general day-to-day sort of like living, right? Because I think you're right that to get everyone to change 360 is very, very difficult and will probably never happen. But if you can even, as you're saying, use a little less, eat a little less meat or whatever, change the paper instead of plastic and all that sort of stuff. So how do you think as you go forward? Because I've got a bit of a theory on this, but I'm interested in how you sort of judge your decision. Like, do you feel like if you have to get in the car and drive somewhere, do you feel bad that you're sending gases into the environment? How do you process that each day?
Mentally, I was thinking about this morning actually as well. I guess from a car perspective, we all should be driving less. I don't benchmark it off, well, I'm doing better than someone else, but often I like to make sure that I'm choosing better compared to what's in the supermarket. So I choose the best possible product that's in the supermarket. I still shop in supermarkets if I'm not shopping in the farmer's market. I'll buy everything in plastic-free alternatives. My bananas don't need to go in plastic bags, and I don't buy pre-cut vegetables, much to my partner's dismay when we first met. He used to think that it would be great if someone else could just chop them up for him. He'd never buy them in plastic, but if someone else could chop up his veggies, he'd be a much happier person.
Yes.
So they're the main key things, is just we haven't changed our ways in that we still shop in the major supermarkets when necessary, but we will buy the most sustainable alternative. And a lot of the packaging these days has changed dramatically, but that's how we live our day to day, we still have to travel a bit for work, which is a challenge. We do offset it where we can, and we're by no means perfect. We're just trying to make the best of what we can do and make sure we're at the forefront of what's available, and to really facilitate and aid transformation and innovation and give the market, an option.
Because there's this move, a bit of a trend right towards like minimalism, which I think is a big jump for some people. But
Huge.
I think if you, with everything that you do and consume and even the way you move about society on a day-to-day basis, if you actually think about why you're doing it, that can go a long way to saving a lot of time, effort and money, right? Like it's not even about, the whole thing's not about being good just for the environment. There's also a lot of other factors that come out of that, right?
Yeah.
So for me, the way I try to think about it is that if you choose that product, know why you're choosing it and try and know, what's behind it. And not to the point where you want to, not drive your car or be stressed about it or whatever. But just if you have that in your thinking that, why am I doing this? Is this the best way? Can we go with one less bottle of water? Can we go to the tap instead of that? Can we walk around the corner instead of drive? All of those things can add up to be a big difference,
Hugely.
right? So I just think that if we can go a little bit more in that direction with our thinking, then the outcome for everyone is going to be a lot better.
Well, it all comes down to education, doesn't it?
Of
the
course,
more we educate ourselves and the more as designers we educate our consumers. I mean, the last thing in the world that designers want is for people to stop consuming. That's not why the designer was put on the planet.
Yes.
We totally recognise and appreciate and support minimalism, but that's not going to help us as designers or developers or business owners or industry or any economy to survive. So what we actually need is to be educating and talking to people about what goes into each of our products. And I think that's a really big societal change that we need to see, even from any product development. I think there needs to be a whole overhaul on what that looks like when you're being taught how to develop something. I know when I was at university, I was studying fashion and I was never taught to consider how many litres and kilograms of what looks like in cotton. If I'm to order 800 pairs of jeans, what does that actually look like from a farming perspective, and what happens to the soil and what happens to the farmer? That's not part of the education, and it needs to be, because you are directly responsible for what that looks like and you don't even know it. And I think that's the consciousness that you're sort of talking about. It's not just the consumer wanting to buy better, it's the designer who needs to design better. And we all just need to do that little bit better, and that will make a huge amount of change, and quickly.
Yes, 100%. So where is your industry going? What are the trends we can see in the future? There's going to be a lot more development, I'm thinking just out aloud here, around the fabrics and that goes into the bags.
Yeah.
Is it going to continue? What are we going to see?
So I think we're going to start seeing, I hope we're going to start seeing an overhaul of how designers operate. I think that as designers, it'll be our responsibility and ownership to make sure that whatever we're producing has an end-of-life plan for it. So, for example, with our handbags, we have a give-back program where you can send us back your bags. We'll give you a 30% off your next purchase, and we will dispose of it, take it apart, recycle it, dispose of it properly, melt it back down, create more plastic. Plastic's so interesting because it's an oil, and it can be used and used and used again if it's a mono fabric, not a blend.
Yep.
I think that we'll start seeing the industry, whether it's consumer demand, making it more sustainable, or the industry itself realising what it's responsible for. I mean, if we don't change our industry, by 2050, a quarter of all carbon emissions will be coming from the fashion industry alone. That is mind-boggling.
So they're increasing the emissions rather than even flattening or
if we don't change, if we keep going on the path we're on right now, the trajectory we're on right now, and we don't make any changes, that's what it's going to look like in 2050.
Because I suppose as the world as a whole becomes, I suppose, more wealthy for overall, then because we have the ability, we tend to consume more, which means that it puts pressure back on it goes all the way down the line, right?
Yeah.
And then you just create more of what you have been creating in the past. So
that's right.
It's an exponential curve we're on here. It's not just that we're going to head in the same direction. It actually gets a lot worse unless we change.
Well, especially from a global warming or climate change perspective and the instability that we're already seeing.
Yeah.
I talk about being a fashion designer, but I also am very avidly involved in climate protesting and climate change activism. So
Okay.
I spent a week last year with Vice President Al Gore in the Climate Reality Project conference, learning and basically upskilling myself to be able to speak eloquently about climate change to my peers, talking about carbon sequestration and how we can make change as people and as a community and as a society. I think that from an industry perspective, it was fantastic and fascinating to be in that room with all of the scientists who are already subscribed to climate change being real, which is a whole nother debate. I
Yes.
don't even know how it's possibly a debate, but anyway, and being able to communicate with them from a fashion perspective and looking at fashion even from a farming perspective and how that influences the land and what that looks like going all the way back down to soil again.
So I have to ask, what was Al Gore like? Can you talk a little bit about the days that you spent with him, and obviously one of the figureheads behind climate change, and one of the early ones too?
Yeah, pioneer of this movement. Goodness, he can speak. He made me cry. I don't think I had a day where I didn't cry. It was eye-opening in that it was almost frustrating. He gave presentations every day about climate change and how this is already happening right now. My dad loves to say things like, well, when someone says electric cars are the future, he says electric cars are the now. This is now. This is happening now.
Yeah.
It's not about it. It's a very interesting way of looking at things. Al Gore, he is passionate and he's classic politician. He's selling this story that's real and it's heartbreaking, but it needs to have activism around it. He said one quote that I wrote down straight away was, "This means the world to me that you're here. This literally means the world." And I just thought, if you could have anyone championing this fight that we're up against, it's the politician like Vice President Al Gore to do so.
Yes.
It was exciting to be able to be in this room of 800 people being trained to talk about these sorts of things within our industry and change the shape of what our industry currently looks like. We talked about carbon cuts and carbon taxes and how that looks from a industry standpoint and whether or not we can implement that. And perhaps that's something that we look at from a metric to measure. So we're working with Levi's, for example, and Levi's have a great sustainability program about them. And, whether or not you say, back down to your 800 pairs of denim that you're ordering, when this designer orders this is what it equals. And so we can then start to measure it and reduce our footprint that way.
Rather than overproduce and then give it to a Costco-like sort of business to get rid of.
Yeah, precisely. One thing that he said that really stuck out to me was that he said, "I'm a capitalist. I'm a green capitalist. And the only way that I'm going to see this to change is when the cost of being green is cheaper than it is to not be green." And I love that.
Which is happening, right?
It is happening.
Well, this has come up a couple of times on the podcast now, and that's really the barrier, the cost barrier you have to cross, right?
Yeah.
Because it's still going to take a little bit of time for some people to catch up to the now cheaper and better way of doing things, and producing better results at the end of it too. In a lot of cases, but that's where we're going to see it really flip, right? And I mean, the car industry is a good one. We're now seeing Porsche's got their electric and hybrid models. I mean, one of the high-end luxury brands there is are now doing these things. So there's no doubt that we're there, but it's going to be really interesting to see how it all plays out and the changes and the innovation that's going to, that the likes of you and others are working on. It's going to be super interesting going forward.
It was interesting. My 5 days with the Climate Reality Project was so inspiring, but it was also incredibly frustrating. And it left me feeling really, really depleted in a way because we already know the answers to these problems. We just can't get the politicians to change things and we can't get governments to make these calls that we know we need to do. So after my conference week, I sat on a beach for 5 days and tried to switch off because I had been quite heartbroken to know that the solutions are already there, but that doesn't stop you from needing to use your voice. I needed the 5 days to
unwind and process it.
to process it all and then get straight back into it.
Yeah, I should put you in touch with Rob Joe. He's been on this podcast as we discussed earlier because he is singing from the exact same hymn book, right?
Yeah.
Like we know what to do.
We do.
It's just a matter of actually doing it. And now that what we should be doing also costs less with better results, like why aren't we?
Obviously, there's a transitional phase in that. And how does that look from a societal standpoint? How do we convince, or how do we show the society, the people who work in the mining industry or the fossil fuel industry, that they are supported and that a transition into renewables still gives them a job and still allows them to earn a living and live a healthy and happy life? How do we convince them or show them that this is possible? And that's, really why we go banging on the doors of parliaments and saying, this is your job to be able to show the security is there. Unfortunately, we've seen that bigger businesses are now doing it for themselves because they know that this is changing. And we're seeing a whole bunch of different policies being written within big business who know that society will turn their backs if they're not seen to be doing the right thing just because parliamentarians are not actively doing things. I mean, we've just had 3 or 4 weeks of the worst bushfires in recorded history. So we know that this is a real thing. We just need to see some big change.
Yes, absolutely. With your collections and that you do you do limited runs of them and then do you sell prior and how does that work?
It's so interesting. We do a pre-order. We like to not overproduce, obviously. That's such a big part of producing a sustainable product, is that you need to know who's going to buy it so that you're not making too many of it and then having to, as you said, put it on sale or pop it at Costco's or however it looks from a clearance perspective. We do limited edition ranges as well. One thing that we started with was called the dead stock collection, or trash bags, and that is because we have hangers worth of dead stock material here in Australia that fashion designers have over-purchased and then not been able to use all of, and it's being basically put in landfill. So at the start of our brand, in unison with Pinatex, and a little surprise thing we're about to release in the next few weeks, is a campaign around dead stock material and what that looks like if you put it into landfill or if you use it as a product and then responsibly dispose of it.
Yeah.
So dead stock is a very interesting conversation, and there's many different opinions that you can have on it. One is that by selling dead stock to young designers, you're encouraging big brands to over-order, which I completely reject. I don't think that big brands are deliberately over-ordering to be able to sell the leftovers to small designers, but that's one conversation. Dead stock is the same in any industry, I guess. It doesn't refer to just fabric, vinyl or offcuts, but it's that concept of over-ordering and then not knowing what to do with it.
Yep.
So we've got a range called the trash bag range coming out in a few weeks, which shows the journey of how we found it in the hangers. We're given access to these hangers full of crap.
Yes, okay.
And what we could do with them to turn them into a luxury product that someone could feel good about carrying, knowing that it's no longer going to landfill.
I can only assume, getting to know you a little bit now, that's probably pretty exciting part of the journey, right? Like taking this hanger full of stuff and all right, what can we create here?
Yeah,
so,
it's like getting your yoga mats and your abseiling ropes. Like, what can we create that looks the same as everyone else but actually has a better backbone?
Do you feel for yourself, do you run the risk of taking on too much?
Yeah.
I know that's just business in general. You kind of have to, right?
That's a good segue actually, because I've just launched another business as well, which I haven't told you about, so I'm sort of sideswiping you here.
Okay, tell me. I'm prepared to be sideswiped.
It's a basics brand. It's called the Common Good Company, and it's a recycled cotton, recycled poly basics brand. And here, she says as she reaches into her bag, is an example of recycled materials.
Oh, awesome. Okay. So this is, for those listening and not watching, this is an upside-down T-shirt. So it goes this way. So this is a T-shirt. Tell us about the material that goes.
So it's 60% recycled cotton, 40% recycled polyester. It's called the Common Good Company.
Okay.
And it is using textile waste, so pre-consumer cutting room floor yarn that's been spun back into a new yarn and then mixed with post-consumer water bottles and recycled carpets and polyester to make the yarn thicker. But tell me, you've got it in your hand. Does it feel like it's recycled?
It doesn't. It feels soft. I mean, it looks great. It's obviously this is a white one we've got here, but if it was on the rack next to something else, you'd never know the difference.
That's right.
To be quite honest. So I'm assuming that the functionality of the material, not that it's something I know a lot about, but is similar, if not better.
Yep, absolutely. And so
awesome.
In the inside of this little tag here, you'll see what each T-shirt represents. So it's a planet saving of 2,700 litres of fresh water, which is the amount that an adult will drink a year of fresh
170 grams of textile waste.
Mm-hmm.
So that is offcuts, chemicals, all that sort of stuff that you would normally have left over from the production of clothes normally.
Yep.
And then you've got 4.5 plastic water bottles.
Yeah.
Pulled from landfill.
Goes to each T-shirt.
Okay.
So this is where I think textile innovation and the way our industry is going,
Yeah.
which is in line with the handbags in that we're using resources that already exist and creating new ones.
So this is 100%.
Recycled.
That's awesome.
And so this...
That's really good.
So it's mind-blowing because how many brands do you think print their values on a T-shirt and then go out to sell it to make their profits? So when you look at businesses, you know, it's a statement of our generation. We wear our values on our clothes.
Yes.
We brand, you know, it might be a Sea Shepherd T-shirt that you're wearing or a Polished Man T-shirt or whatever it is charity that you believe in or cause, and we print them on virgin material, which undoes all of the good work that they're trying to achieve. Not those two businesses that I just mentioned. They're much more mindful. But, you know, there's not been an option in the market until 2019 or a little earlier where we're able to now put it into a mass production of textile waste and stopping it from going into land and turning it into something new that can be used again and again. And the T-shirt itself is recyclable as well, which is really interesting. We can now turn that into bed linen and carpets and rugs and home furnishing.
And is that the plan?
Yeah, that is the plan.
So my question was whether you
ever get tired.
well, you kind of can't when you're in business, right?
No.
I know that from personal experience.
Yes.
Even if you feel it, you can't. But anyway, so I asked you if there's a danger that you're trying to do too much, and then you've responded with another thing that you're doing. So is there a danger? Or?
There is. No, there is. And that's why I'm so lucky to have partners who are the finance side of things.
Yes, yeah.
And the operations, and I can focus on the creativity and making sure that what I'm producing I can have onus for. And I think that we do spread ourselves too thin as entrepreneurs, and that's why we need to make sure we've really chosen the right people to work with to make sure that the cogs are still turning and that it's still a sustainable business profitability and from an environmental standpoint. Also, I am a big believer in doing one thing and doing one thing well, which you wouldn't believe because I have two very environmentally focused businesses, but we only do 2 collections for handbags a year. So that gives my focus wholeheartedly to how they're developed and what that looks like. Really excitingly, our hardware is all recycled metal as well on our handbags, which I didn't even mention, which is all pretty crazy, to be honest with you. But that's the blessing of being in 2020. And with our T-shirts, again, once I'm a pattern maker by trade, once I've got the cut correct, I don't need to make a change. I just need to make sure that it's being seen and used by the right people so that I can replace, because it literally is to be a replacement for virgin cotton.
So who are the right people that you want?
Everyone and anyone who wants to buy a T-shirt.
Okay.
Listeners? No.
Yes.
The right people are the people who are already printing on blank T-shirts and are looking for a replacement.
And in terms of something like businesses or whatever you want to print on, be a great choice. And in terms of cost, are you there or thereabouts?
Wholesale. Yeah, we are a wholesale company. We also do a direct-to-consumer price. So we sell a printed T-shirt like this for $40 direct-to-consumer, and you can buy them on the online website, or you can send us an email, which the website will direct you to, which is for wholesale pricing, because we recognise that a lot of people want to get their business out there and then they want to be able to on-sell it. And so you can print up your own brand onto our T-shirts and make your own profits that way.
Okay, so if somebody wants to sort of get new uniforms or whatever.
Precisely.
That's an awesome
idea. So it could be a plumbing business, or it could be a roofing business, or it could be a cafe, or it could be a school. Anyone that would be printing. Currently there's only really a couple of providers out there, and none of them really nail the sustainability side of things necessarily.
Yes.
It's an interesting one. You're looking at a $2 T-shirt for some people then because they're seeing a profit to be able to wear their values on their clothes, but the value needs to come from the T-shirt itself as well.
Yeah, it's a shift in mindset, isn't it? And we all, even the big brands, we buy Nike stuff because we want to feel like we're an athlete, right?
That's right.
And we think we're one when we put it on. Like that's the thing we're kind of buying, right?
Yeah.
And, full credit to them and the branding that they've done, and one of the biggest companies in the world and biggest brands in the world, they've done it really well. But as this mindset and our education gets better in this space, I think we're going to have a lot more people thinking along these lines, and kind of sounds cool to wear water bottles and
textile waste.
Why not? I think it's super cool. The website is
The Common Good Company. So it's thecommongoodco.com.
And Ahimsa, what's the website there?
So this is Ahimsa Collective. So it's AHIMSA. Ahimsa, and the word ahimsa is actually a Sanskrit word meaning no harm, so we use it to apply it to the people, the planet and the animals. So it's a bit of a triple threat word, but it's ahimsacollective.com. trenchtalk.com.
For you, Tessa, yourself, are you a planner? Do you look at the next 5 or 10 years of where you might be or where you want to go? What does that look like?
I am a planner. I'm a visual board sort of drawer.
Yes.
And probably how I landed myself here today, because I did that 5 years ago. And I've just drawn my next one out, and my plans are to keep developing and keep working on textile innovation that can curb the problems we've already got within the industry and sharing them. I think that the only way we're going to create change is to share these innovations, and I think keeping them up our sleeves is not going to see the change that we need quick enough anyway.
You want to keep sharing. That's awesome. Question that I do ask everybody as we sort of pull this to a bit of a close. If you could have one law changed or implemented, what would it be?
Ooh, well, from a design perspective, I've got a couple of answers to that.
Yes.
But from a global or societal perspective, I would suggest that we ceased subsidising fossil fuel companies and started to transition into renewables and how that looks, because for every product that we develop, we've got an energy cost to it. And if we can at least say that it's made from renewable energy, we're already making a far quicker and faster and larger change in how we develop our products. And then from a design perspective, from implementation, it would be my dream that designers are taught what their product looks like at its end of life and how we can get it back to its raw materials. So from a legal perspective, that you cannot produce a product if you do not have the capacity to return it to its traditional or raw material to be reused again.
Okay, so be a custodian of the raw materials.
That's right.
Rather than a user of them.
That's right, yeah. You know, if I've produced this T-shirt, I need to know what can be done with it afterwards, and I need, as a business, to be able to provide the consumer with a method to get it back to me.
Sounds good. Now, you mentioned a documentary earlier. I want to ask the name of it, the one that you watched and then went vegan for my own interest.
It's called Cowspiracy.
Oh, yeah, I watched it, yep.
Yeah.
Very popular when it first came out, that documentary, and that changed your whole...
It made me realise that I'm not someone who drops rubbish on the ground, so why would I be continuing to eat what I was eating when it had a far greater effect on the land? The next one that I watched, and documentaries are very interesting to me because I feel that I must obviously learn a lot more from the emotive music that goes behind them. The other one that led me to Ahimsa Collective was A Plastic Ocean, and it was the amount of plastic that we see in the ocean and what that looks like in our food chain and how that's affecting our land and animals and global ecosystem. But one that we're about to show on Sunday night is called 2040.
2040.
And I don't know if you've seen it yet, but it's an insight into what the world could look like in 2040 if we make some changes now. It's essentially through the eyes of what the world could look like in 2040.
Yes.
And it's really uplifting and compelling and shows how we can actually make a change. And one of the things that we do at Ahimsa Collective and at the Common Good Company, obviously, because it's one and the same, is to show documentaries and spark the conversation and educate to empower, because it's the only way that we're going to see change. We need to present the problem and then provide the solution. So they're things that we show on our websites. We're always holding screenings and getting like-minded people together, or people who are just interested and don't know anyone.
Got it. So is there anything else that you want to add before we do wrap this up?
The only thing that I would add is to make sure that you do keep consuming, because it keeps the businesses alive and it keeps us on our toes to keep developing and changing and innovating. But most importantly, look into what you're buying and put your money where your values are.
Awesome.
Vote with your wallet.
Yeah, that's the most effective way of voting, right? From a lot of different perspectives. Well, Tessa, I want to thank you for being here today. I admire what you're doing, the thought that goes into it. The more people like you that we have going around, the better. I really think that we'll all be. So, from a business perspective, from a sustainability perspective, from just a general good perspective, I do admire what you're doing, and I really look forward to seeing. I'm going to get some of these T-shirts first of all. So start wearing some of these bottles that you're pulling back and giving them a good go. I'm looking forward to doing that. But thank you for what you're doing, and thanks for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. I've loved every minute of it.
Hey everybody, it's Matt again. Thanks for listening. Just a couple of things before you guys clock off. You can get all Trench Talk episodes at xrm.com.au/podcast. You can also sign up for other goodies at the same site. Just plonk your email in there and you are covered. That's X for X-ray, R for Romeo, M for Mike.com.au/podcast. If you really like what I'm bringing you, please head to iTunes, subscribe to this show and leave a review right there. And lastly, if you want to contact me directly, type type the @ symbol followed by Mr. Matt Reynolds into your search bar and you'll find all the social links. Goodbye.